My name is Margaret Wilson. I am 86 years old, and though the years have softened my hair to silver and slowed my steps, there is a memory etched so deeply in me that it has never faded. It sits in the marrow of my bones, in the silence of sleepless nights, in the shadows that creep when I close my eyes. I will never forget the day my father tied me to a fence like an unwanted animal and left me to starve. I can still feel the coarse rope biting into my wrists, cutting deeper each time I struggled. The wood of the fence was rough against my back, splinters digging into my skin. The Kentucky sun glared down mercilessly, baking the earth beneath me until it cracked. My lips split, bleeding at the corners, my throat burning with thirst so intense it felt like fire climbing up from my stomach to choke me. First I screamed. My voice tore through the hot air, high and desperate. "Papa, please, please don't leave me here." My words broke into sobs. I called until my throat grew raw, until the only sound left was a hoarse croak that scraped my lungs. He didn't turn back. Not once. The slam of the screen door was the last sound I heard from him that day. After that, it was only the buzzing of flies around my face, the creak of the fence as my body sagged heavier against it, and the pounding of my own heart. The first day I believed he'd come back. He always came back after the beatings, after the curses. He'd stagger out with his whiskey breath, mutter something cruel, and drag me inside again. But that evening passed, and the stars came out cold and sharp in the sky, and I was still tied there. By the second day, hunger twisted my stomach into knots, clawing and scraping as though it wanted to eat itself alive. My head spun, and every sound, the rustle of leaves, the chirp of crickets, echoed like thunder. My tongue was so dry it felt like leather in my mouth. I tried to lick the dew off the fence in the early morning, but it only left me splintered and bleeding. It was then the thoughts began. Dark thoughts. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was cursed. Maybe I had no place in this world. I thought about my mother, the woman I had never known, who died bringing me into this life. I thought about what my father said over and over again, that it should have been me who died instead of her. For a moment I believed him. For a moment I thought maybe this was justice. By the third day, the line between dreaming and waking blurred. My body was weak, my legs numb from lack of movement, my wrists swollen purple beneath the rope. I thought I saw faces in the clouds, my grandmother's, my mother's, even my own reflection. I whispered to them, begged them to take me away, to end it. Death seemed kinder than what I was enduring. And then, when I thought my final breath was slipping away, a shadow fell across me. At first I thought it was just another trick of my mind. Hallucination. But then I heard a voice, deep, rough, trembling. "Dear Lord, who would do this?" A pair of hands touched my shoulders, gentle, careful. Fingers tugged at the ropes. The snap of a blade slicing through hemp filled the silence. My body collapsed forward, too weak to hold itself, and those same arms caught me before I hit the ground. "You're safe now, child," the man whispered, his breath shaking as though he could hardly believe what he was seeing. Safe. Could I ever truly be safe again? His flask touched my lips, and water, cool and sweet, slid down my throat. My body convulsed with it, desperate, grateful, terrified all at once. His face was blurred to me, haloed by the sun behind him, but I remember the look in his eyes. Horror, pity, determination. That was the moment everything changed. That was the moment a stranger's kindness interrupted my father's cruelty and gave me a second chance at life. But who was this man? Why did he stop for me, a girl no one wanted, a girl even her own father abandoned to die? And what would my father do when he found out someone had interfered with his cruelty? You see, before I tell you what happened next, you need to understand the road that led me there. The childhood soaked in shadows, the nights of whispers and fear, the secret wounds no one saw. Because this moment, as terrible as it was, didn't come out of nowhere. It was years in the making. And if you think what I've just told you is unbearable, wait until you hear what came before. I was born in the summer of 1939, in a weather-beaten farmhouse on the outskirts of a tiny Kentucky town. My mother's name was Evelyn, and though I never knew her face, People told me she was as gentle as spring rain and as beautiful as a sunrise over the fields. But I never got to meet her. She died giving birth to me. From the very first moment of my life, I was branded with blame. My father, Charles Wilson, never forgave me. To him, my first breath was the very thing that stole away the love of his life. He looked at me not as his daughter but as the thief of his happiness. And though I was too young to understand, the resentment in his eyes spoke louder than any words. Neighbors said he was a different man before I was born. Hard-working, proud, and devoted to his wife. But after her death, something inside him rotted. He turned to whiskey, and the bottle became his only friend. By the time I was old enough to toddle through the dirt yard, he had already begun looking at me like I was a curse he was forced to live with. I grew up hungry not just for food but for affection. I would watch other children in town holding their father's hands, running to them with laughter. I longed for even one moment like that. Instead, what I received were cold stares and cruel mutterings. I remember one evening when I was about 5 years old, standing barefoot in the kitchen, holding a cracked cup of water. My father came in, his boots heavy against the floor, and his eyes bloodshot from drink. He paused, looked at me, and with a voice thick with bitterness muttered, "You should have died instead of her." I froze, my little fingers tightening around the cup until it slipped and shattered on the floor. The water spread across the wood, and I stood in the puddle, shivering though it was the middle of summer. He didn't hit me that night. Sometimes the words alone cut sharper than his fists. The only kindness I knew came from my grandmother. His mother, Rose Wilson. She lived in a small cottage at the far end of the property, a widow who had weathered storms of her own. She was the kind of woman who carried strength quietly, in the way she knelt to tend her garden, in the way her hands smelled of lavender and earth, in the way she wrapped me in her arms as if I were worth something. She was the one who brushed out my tangled hair and hummed old lullabies. She was the one who patched together a doll from rags and buttons, placing it in my hands and saying, "This is yours, Margaret. Something of your very own." Those moments with her felt like stolen treasures. When she whispered, "You are not the mistakes of others, my child," I believed her, at least until I stepped back into my father's house, where those words were drowned by his bitterness. But even Grandma Rose's love could not shield me from the storms inside my father. He had ways of reminding me I was unwanted. If there wasn't enough food, I was the one who went hungry. If the chores weren't done, the punishment fell on me, no matter whose fault it was. His words were venom, his hands sometimes worse. And then there were the whispers. I didn't understand them at first, but I overheard enough to know that people in town looked at me with suspicion. Some said I carried a curse. Some said my father had made a deal with sin itself, and that my mother's death in childbirth was punishment. I never knew how much of that my father believed, but one winter night when I was about 7, I overheard him speaking to a man outside. Their voices were low, drifting through the cracks of the cabin wall. "That girl ain't worth the bread she eats," my father growled. "She's a curse on this family. Mark my words, she'll bring nothing but ruin." My heart hammered as I pressed my ear to the wood. The other man spoke, his voice hushed. "Charles, she's just a child." "A child?" My father spat. "No. She's the reason Evelyn is in the grave." The man didn't answer. Their footsteps faded, and I crept back to bed, curling beneath my thin blanket, shivering though the fire still glowed. That was the night I first realized the truth. My father didn't just dislike me. He wanted me gone. But if he despised me so much, why keep me alive at all? Why not rid himself of me then and there? That question gnawed at me for years. Was it because of Grandma Rose? Was she the only thread holding me to life? The only shield between me and the full force of his hatred? There were days when he ignored me completely. Days when he went into town and didn't return until long after dark. On those nights, I dared to dream of a different life. Of being seen, being loved, being someone's child instead of someone's curse. I would lie awake imagining a mother who smiled at me, a father who lifted me onto his shoulders. But dreams are fragile things. They break easily when reality crashes in. One evening when I was 9 years old, I sat by the hearth with Grandma Rose, holding the doll she had sewn for me. She looked at me with those wise, tired eyes and said, "Margaret, you have to carry light inside you. Even if no one else gives it to you, you must protect it. Because one day, it will protect you." I didn't fully understand what she meant then. I only nodded, clutching the doll tighter, wishing her words could shield me like armor. But just weeks later, tragedy struck again. Grandma Rose fell ill. Pneumonia, they said. She grew weaker with each passing day, her once strong hands trembling as she tried to hold mine. And then one morning she was gone. With her death, the last shield between me and my father's fury vanished. The cottage was shuttered, the garden left untended, and I was left alone in a house with a man who looked at me like I was the source of every wrong in his life. That was the beginning of the end. Without Grandma Rose, there was no one to witness his cruelty, no one to whisper to me that I mattered, no one to stand in the way. From that day forward, his hatred grew bolder, sharper, darker. And deep down, though I didn't want to admit it, I knew it was only a matter of time before his anger went further than words and beatings. How far would it go? Would he really try to erase me from the world altogether? You might think you know the answer, but the truth is more horrifying than you can imagine. After Grandma Rose's death, the house grew colder in ways that had nothing to do with weather. The silence was heavier, like a blanket smothering the air. Her laughter, her humming while she worked in the garden, the smell of lavender she carried on her skin, all of it was gone. What remained was me and my father, and the bitterness that filled every corner of his heart. He no longer had to hide his cruelty. Before, he had at least shown some restraint when Grandma Rose was near. But with her gone, there was no witness, no one to soften the blows, no one to whisper comfort to me afterward. His anger became my constant companion, unpredictable and vicious. I was 10 the first time I realized he didn't need a reason anymore. One evening I was sweeping the kitchen floor. A cup slipped from the counter and shattered. It wasn't even mine, I hadn't touched it, but the sound of glass breaking sent him storming in. His hand came down so fast I didn't even have time to flinch. My cheek burned with the force of the slap, and my ears rang. "You worthless child," he shouted, the smell of whiskey hot on his breath. "Can't you do anything right?" I wanted to scream back that it wasn't me, that I hadn't broken it, but I knew better. Words only brought more blows. So I stayed silent, my hands trembling as I swept the shards. The silence was safer than truth. But even silence couldn't protect me forever. The punishments grew harsher as I grew older. If I lingered too long at school, he accused me of shaming him. If I smiled, he said I was mocking him. If I cried, he called me weak. His rage didn't need fuel, it burned on its own. And yet in those years I discovered something unexpected. Small pockets of kindness, like cracks of light slipping into a dark room. My teacher, Mrs. Harper, was one of those lights. She was a stern woman to most, but to me, she showed a gentleness she rarely revealed. She noticed my bruises, though I tried to hide them beneath long sleeves. She noticed when I came to school hungry, my stomach growling louder than the chalk against the board. Quietly, without making a scene, she would slip me an extra sandwich or a piece of fruit. One afternoon she placed a book in my hands, and of Green Gables. She looked me in the eye and said, "Stories can take you places, Margaret. Remember that. They can show you the world is bigger than the walls around you." That night, I read by the faint glow of a candle until my eyes stung. I devoured every word. In those pages I found escape. I found girls who laughed freely, families who cared for each other, worlds where cruelty wasn't the law of the house. Books became my secret refuge. But no story could shield me when I closed the cover and stepped back into reality. The breaking point came one stormy night. The rain pounded against the roof, thunder rolling across the sky like an angry drum. My father stumbled in, soaked and furious, his boots leaving muddy prints across the floor. I stayed in the corner, hoping if I stayed small enough, quiet enough, he would forget I was there. But his eyes found me, sharp as knives. "You think you're better than me, don't you?" he slurred. "With your books, your silence, your pitiful face that looks just like your mother's." My heart thudded in my chest. I didn't answer. He staggered closer, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You think you deserve to live. You should have died in her place. She was worth something. You're nothing but a curse." The words sliced through me, sharper than any blade. For the first time, he wasn't just saying I was worthless. He was saying I didn't deserve to exist. Then, with a suddenness that froze my blood, he whispered, "Maybe I should have finished you off the day you were born." I remember the way the room spun, the way the storm outside seemed to pause for a breath. His words weren't just drunken ramblings. They were a promise. That night, I lay awake on my narrow bed, listening to the storm fade. Every creak of the house made me flinch. Every shadow felt like it was reaching for me. My father's words replayed in my mind over and over. "Maybe I should have finished you off." It was the first time I understood that his hate wasn't going to stop. It wasn't going to burn out or fade away. It was only going to grow darker, heavier, more dangerous. And though I didn't know when or how, I felt in my bones that one day, he would try to make good on his words. That knowledge sat in me like a stone. It haunted me through my days at school, through the small moments of joy I tried to steal in the woods, through the quiet prayers I whispered into the night. How do you live when you know the person meant to protect you is plotting your end? How do you keep breathing when every breath feels borrowed? I didn't know. All I knew was that my time was running out. The storm of his anger was building toward something. And when it broke, I would be standing in the center, with no shelter to hide under. But what would be the breaking point? What would finally snap inside him and push him from words into action? You might think you've heard the worst already. But trust me, the night he finally decided to act was darker, crueler, and more terrifying than anything before. The wind that night smelled of rain and something older, rot and iron and the thick metallic tang of fear. I remember the porch light flickering as my father stumbled through the doorway, soaked through, boots clumping mud across the floorboards. The house felt smaller somehow, like the walls had leaned in to listen. I was folding a strip of cloth into a rag doll on the kitchen table, trying to breathe steady so my hands wouldn't shake. I could hear the distant hush of the town, the soft chorus of crickets pretending everything was ordinary. Inside, everything was anything but. He didn't speak kindly. He never did now. He moved with a kind of animal certainty, the slow, inevitable way predators close on prey. The whiskey made him loud, his words sloppy and cruel, but the hate under them was a steady thing, like cold iron under a skin of flame. He stared at me as if he were measuring me for a verdict. "You think you can hide in your books and pretend you're someone else?" he barked, voice raw. "You think you're better than me because a teacher hands you a story? Don't be a fool." My chest tightened. I mouthed a reply and swallowed it instead. I had learned silence was a currency he accepted. Words were a provocation. Silence was how I lasted another day with fewer bruises. He reached the table and swept his hand across it, sending my crude doll tumbling across the boards. The cloth doll hit the floor and rolled into the shadows. For an instant, something small and human flickered across his face. Annoyance, maybe regret, but it was gone. "You're a curse," he said, and the words fell like stones. "You should have died with her." The sentence had a rhythm I had heard before, one that had been repeated until it was no longer just an insult. It was a doctrine. He took a step closer, and I could smell the stale breath of the bottle, feel the danger in the air. I stood up, because I could not bear to stay seated and feel his eyes drilling into me. "Please," I whispered, the word barely a thread in the room. "Don't." He cut me off with a slap. It landed on my cheek with a sound that seemed to echo in my skull. Pain flared, bright and humiliating. My hand flew to my face, trembling. The taste of copper was in my mouth from where my lips split. "You want to plead," he snarled. "You want to beg. You should beg the earth to take you." His fingers clenched into fists. I could see the knuckles white as if he held a bone in his hand rather than a fist. He grabbed my wrist, one of his grips that had become familiar and hated, and hauled me to the door. The night air hit like a slap, damp and sharp, smelling of wet soil and something else. Possibility. He dragged me across the yard, boots drumming a rough march on the packed dirt. I remember the fence before I remember the rope. A crooked line of posts, weathered and dry, the wood swelled and split from years of sun and storms. It had always been there, demarcating the perimeter of our little farm, the boundary between the known misery of our yard and anything beyond. He shoved me against the fence with a force that took my breath away. The wood dug into my spine, splintering, cold and hard. He roughly looped a rope around my wrists, the coarse fibers rasping against my skin. Each knot he tied felt like a sentence being pronounced against me. I fought, of course I fought, kicking, twisting, clawing at his hands, but his grip was iron and the rope bit deeper as I pulled. The knots held. They always did. He tightened the last loop with a savage finality. "You'll learn your place," he said, spitting the words like venom. "You'll see what it means to be nothing." He left me there. He turned his back like a man done with a nasty chore, and the screen door slammed, the sound closing off the world. The yard that used to feel like a home shrank to the space bounded by rope and fence posts. My wrists burned where the knots cut into tender skin. The blood that welled up dried quickly in the heat and stung like salt. My feet could barely feel the ground. I curdled inward, trying to protect what little warmth I had, trying to fold myself so small the night would swallow me and forget. The first hours were a kind of delirium. My mind raced through memories like a fevered slideshow. Grandma Rose's hands, the way she hummed over the garden, the lessons in school that felt like doors to other worlds, Mother's face hinted at in family stories, the whispering neighbors who looked at me as if their pity were a leash. I screamed until my throat was raw. The sound blurred into the insect chorus like static, meaningless and ignored. Daylight brought with it a new kind of agony. The sun climbed overhead and poured light like hot oil over the yard. My lips cracked and bled until they stuck together when I blinked. My tongue swelled, cotton dry and useless. Thirst is a beast that eats the edges of sanity. On the first day, I convinced myself someone would come. Grandma Rose would appear, or Mrs. Harper would march in with a stack of books and a face like justice. But the hours passed and only the heat and the buzz of flies answered me. On the second day, hunger became sharp. My stomach twisted and peeled itself raw. I thought of bread. I imagined the smell of yeast and warm crust, and for a moment, my mouth watered, betraying the searing emptiness inside. I licked the edge of my hand until it was raw, tasted the salt of old sweat. The world narrowed to the rope, the fence, the ache. My knees buckled and the rope bit harder into my wrists. Panic rose like bile. I remember the dreaming, visions of my mother's face, soft and far away, of being wrapped in a white cloth and taken to a place where no one cursed me. I prayed aloud, which I had never done in earnest before, asking for any mercy at all. I asked God if this was punishment, if I had sinned because I was born. The neighbors knew. I could see their faces sometimes, pressed to distant windows. Once, through the blurred glare of pain, I thought I saw Mrs. Harper hurry past the garden with a parcel in her arms. My heart leapt, a desperate, foolish joy. But she kept walking. She looked away. Perhaps shame or fear kept her from coming. Perhaps she thought it was none of her business. Or perhaps she couldn't fathom the depth of what had been done. The sun sank slow on the third day and my muscles trembled from exhaustion. My frame, once lithe, began to crumble like the fence's old wood. Small splinters of strength breaking off. My breath came in little rasping chuffs. I felt each second stretch into a lifetime. I thought my heart would stop. I thought I would drift away on a thread of relief. Then, as the sky burned with the purple and blood of dusk, I heard another sound. Footsteps, different from the shuffling gait of my father. Not the clumsy, arrogant tread, but something careful, soft, like someone walking around broken glass. Shadow fell over me. For a breath, I believed it was my father returning to gloat. A voice said, low and incredulous, "My God, who would do this to a child?" The sound was a lifeline. Someone knelt. Fingers went to the rope. The snap of a blade echoed, and then, cool, wet, water touched my lips. A hand under my shoulders, lifting me, holding me like I was fragile glass. Relief flooded my mind, and then fear rose again. If this stranger freed me, who would protect me from my father's wrath? Would rescue me new danger? Who was this man willing to defy my father? And most terrifying of all, what would my father do when he realized someone had stolen his punishment from him? The stranger's hands were steady, though his voice trembled as he worked the knife through the rope. "Hold still, child. You're safe now. I've got you." The rope snapped and my arms fell forward, too heavy to hold up. I slumped into his chest, and for the first time in days, I felt the warmth of another human being who wasn't striking me. He caught me firmly but gently, as if he'd been carrying fragile things his whole life. I tried to speak, but only a rasp escaped. My lips were cracked, my throat scorched. He didn't ask questions then, just tipped a canteen to my mouth. Water dribbled across my chin, cool as mercy. I gasped as the liquid slid down my throat, each drop a miracle. My body shuddered in gratitude. The man's face came into focus in fragments. Sunburned skin, a thick mustache, eyes that burned with a mixture of pity and fury. He wore work clothes, sturdy boots, patched trousers, a shirt rolled at the sleeves. He looked like a man who lived close to the earth, but his hands... oh, his hands were clean, deliberate, practiced in kindness. "My name's Samuel," he said at last. "Samuel Carter. And you?" "Margaret," I whispered, voice almost too faint to catch. He gave a curt nod, as though fixing the name in his memory. Then he glanced toward the house, his jaw tightening. "Who did this?" My eyes flickered to the door. The fear in me was so raw I couldn't form the words. He didn't press, he seemed to know. His expression darkened with understanding. "We can't stay here," he muttered. He pulled me up, half carrying, half dragging me toward the edge of the yard. My legs wobbled beneath me, but his grip was firm, and together we moved. Every step away from that fence felt like crossing into another world. But safety is never so simple. Behind us, the screen door creaked open. "Margaret!" The sound of my father's voice tore through the air like thunder. Samuel froze. He positioned himself between me and the doorway, body tense like a soldier preparing for battle. My father stumbled out, a dark silhouette against the porch light, eyes squinting at the sight of us. "What the hell are you doing with my daughter?" he bellowed, staggering down the steps. Samuel's voice was steady, calm in a way that felt dangerous. "I found her tied to your fence, half dead. No man who loves his child would do such a thing." My father laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "That girl ain't worth spit. She's cursed." I was doing the world a favor. Something inside me broke at those words. Even before Samuel could respond, I let out a sob so deep it rattled my chest. The truth was out in the open now, venom laid bare. Samuel's eyes hardened. "Then you're no father," he said. "You're a coward." The air crackled with tension. My father's fists clenched, his frame stiffening. I thought he'd attack. Instead, he spat in the dirt. "Take her then. See how long you last with that burden. But mark my words, she'll bring you nothing but misery." He turned back toward the house, his shadow swallowed by the doorway. Samuel didn't move for a long moment. He kept watching the door, as if expecting my father to return. When the silence held, he finally turned to me and said, "Let's go, Margaret. You're coming with me now." As we walked into the night, my heart pounded with conflicting beats, relief, terror, and the strange, fragile spark of hope. But deep down, I knew my father wasn't finished. Because men like him don't just let go. Samuel lived on the far side of town, in a modest house that smelled of wood smoke and bread. His wife, Elizabeth, greeted us at the door, her eyes widening when she saw my state. Without hesitation, she wrapped me in a shawl and pressed me into a chair by the fire. She didn't ask questions. At least not at first. She moved with quiet efficiency, setting bread, broth, and warm milk before me. The first spoonful burned my cracked lips, but I didn't care. I devoured every bite like an animal, tears streaming down my face. Elizabeth stroked my hair, murmuring words I couldn't fully understand, but the tone was enough. Comfort, reassurance, love. For the first time in my life, I felt what it was to be nurtured. Samuel explained what had happened in terse words. Elizabeth's face paled, her eyes filling with anger. "How could anyone?" she whispered. She looked at me, then at her husband. "She can't go back there." "She won't," Samuel said firmly. They gave me a room of my own, small but warm, with quilts that smelled of lavender. I lay awake that first night, staring at the ceiling. Part of me feared I'd wake to find it all a dream, that I'd open my eyes and be tied again to the fence. But another part of me, a braver part, began to imagine the possibility of belonging. The days that followed were strange and new. Elizabeth taught me how to sew. Samuel showed me how to tend the garden. Their children, Anna and Luke, welcomed me shyly at first, then eagerly, as if I'd always been part of their games. I began to laugh again, the sound awkward in my throat but slowly becoming natural. But happiness has a way of drawing shadows. It was a week later when I saw him again, my father, lurking at the edge of the Carters' property. His figure was a dark blot against the horizon, watching. My stomach clenched. Fear returned like a knife twisting in old wounds. I told Samuel. His jaw tightened. "Don't worry, Margaret. He won't take you again." But his confidence didn't erase my dread. Nights grew restless. I woke at every creak, every rustle, certain my father was coming. Then one morning the Carters' barn door was found open, animals scattered. A warning. My father's way of saying he hadn't forgotten. The Carters were good, but I knew the storm was far from over. The day it happened was bright and deceptively calm. Birds sang in the trees, children laughed in the yard, and for a few blissful hours I believed I was safe. Elizabeth had just shown me how to mend a tear in Luke's shirt when the shouting began. Samuel burst through the door, his face ashen. "He's here." Before we could react, my father kicked the door open. He stood in the doorway, eyes bloodshot, rage pouring off him in waves. In his hand glinted a blade. "You think you can steal my blood?" he roared, pointing the knife at Samuel. "You think you can make me a fool?" The room erupted in chaos. Elizabeth screamed, grabbing Anna and Luke, pulling them behind her. Samuel stepped forward, steady, unyielding. I froze, terror locking my limbs. "She's not yours to harm anymore," Samuel said. "You lost that right when you tied her to that fence." My father's face twisted. "She'll always be mine. She's my curse to bear, and if I can't keep her, no one will." He lunged. The knife arced through the air, flashing toward Samuel. The two men grappled, bodies colliding, grunts filling the room. I screamed, heart hammering as the struggle spun closer to me. In the chaos I saw it, the knife slipping, turning, finding its mark. A sharp cry filled the room, followed by the thud of a body hitting the floor. I don't remember moving, but suddenly I was at Samuel's side, blood pooling beneath him. His breath rattled, eyes fixed on me. "Don't be afraid," he whispered. My father yanked the knife free, his chest heaving. He turned to me, face twisted with something between triumph and madness. "You see, girl, you bring nothing but death." I thought I'd collapse under the weight of it. But then something in me snapped, not with fear but with fury. I grabbed the nearest thing, a heavy iron pan from the hearth, and swung with every ounce of strength I had left. The blow landed with a sickening crack. My father staggered, dropped the knife, and crumpled to the floor. Silence followed, broken only by my ragged breathing. Elizabeth rushed to Samuel, sobbing, pressing cloth to his wound. The children clung to each other, wide-eyed. I stood trembling, the pan slipping from my hands, staring at the man who had haunted me my whole life, now motionless on the floor. But was he dead or just unconscious? And if he lived, what fury would follow? The room smelled of iron and smoke, fear clinging to the air like fog. My father lay sprawled on the floor, his chest rising in shallow, ragged breaths. Alive but barely. I backed away, my hands shaking, the weight of what I'd done pressing down like a mountain. Samuel groaned, his eyes fluttering open. Elizabeth's hands were stained red as she fought to stop the bleeding. "Stay with me, Samuel," she begged. I dropped to my knees beside him. His hand found mine, weak but steady. "Margaret, listen to me," he whispered. This isn't your curse. This is his. Don't let his hate make you hate yourself." His breath hitched. "Promise me, you'll live." "I promise," I choked out, tears blurring my vision. Voices filled the yard then. Neighbors drawn by the shouting, the clash, the violence. They crowded into the doorway, eyes wide as they took in the scene. Samuel bleeding, Elizabeth frantic, my father on the floor, and me, trembling in the middle of it all. The sheriff pushed through, his face grim. "What happened here?" Elizabeth stood, her voice firm despite the tears streaking her cheeks. "He tried to kill us." Samuel fought him off. "Margaret saved us all." The sheriff's gaze flicked to my father. "And him." Elizabeth's silence was answer enough. They carried my father out on a stretcher. Whether he lived or died, I never saw him again. Some said he rotted in prison, others that he drank himself into an early grave. To me, he was already gone, buried under years of hate. Samuel survived, though the scar never left him. It became a reminder, not of weakness, but of the cost of bravery. I stayed with the Carters. They became the family I'd never had. In their home, I learned that love wasn't weakness. It was strength. It was the power to break chains forged by cruelty. Years later, when I grew old enough to tell my story, people would shake their heads, shocked that a father could do such things to his own child. They'd ask how I survived. The truth is, survival isn't just about endurance. It's about hope, thin, fragile, but powerful enough to keep you breathing until a miracle comes. My miracle was Samuel. My salvation was Elizabeth. And the lesson I carry even now, as an old woman telling you this story, is simple. The darkness someone tries to bury you in cannot stop the light someone else chooses to shine on you. If you are listening to this and you feel trapped, beaten down, convinced you are worthless, hear me. You are not your scars. You are not the names they call you. You are not the curse they try to lay on you. You are more. You are worthy of life, of love, of a future. And sometimes the miracle you need is closer than you think. If this story touched you, share it. Someone out there needs to know that even in the darkest pit, there is hope, and survival is possible.